Well, hi Eddie. It's so nice to see you today.
Hi, Serena. It's good to see you.
Thanks so much for joining us. The day, let's see. Where are you and how are you arriving?
I'm in Sunnyside, Queens, here in New York. I'm at home in my apartment. I just got here yesterday. So, how I'm arriving today is I'm feeling really glad to be home for a short period of time. I've been spending good time with family and moving through a variety of things, everything from just like health stuff with family members and home care and yeah, but also time with my niece and nephew, time with my husband's cousins' kids, and yeah, time with just like multiple generations, my grandma, aunts, uncles. It's been a full time, so you're catching me like, yeah, home, glad to be home, thinking of all the people that I've been with, and yeah, just a little in between before I head back in.
Mm. By the way, Elizabeth Garlow says hi. I was just on the phone
Uh,
with her and we were talking about how important and nourishing it has been to while moving through hard things, yeah, just be accompanied by her local community and Janice in particular, who I believe you met as well um, in Detroit. And yeah, the youngers, the kiddos and the elders, and um, sometimes being able to step away from the bigness of everything happening around us and be nourished by those in our intimate communities.
totally.
So
Yeah. How are you showing up?
I'm showing up feeling nourished from this call with dear Elizabeth. Every time we talk, these ideas around like there are so many beloved communities that are occurring, happening, being built, being nourished across the country, and just such a desire to like tap into the spirit of that, which I think will be the spirit, and I sense the spirit of this conversation as well. Um, and yeah, feeling grief, feeling gratitude, and eagerness to, yeah, just learn more about um, the ways that you're sensing into this question of beginning again,
Mm,
which actually feels less like a question and more like a way of moving through the world and through our times. And
yeah.
Eddie, you were there with us in New York City a couple weeks ago at Riverside Church on the anniversary of Dr. King's Beyond Vietnam speech, and we were also in an intergenerational conversation about what does it mean to begin again in our lives, in our movement work. And one of the things that came up in that really beautiful weekend was some of the inquiry and practice that you've been in these days. Um, and I want to just invite you into sharing in your own language what that inquiry is and also how it weaves into this broader engagement we're taking up around building new worlds in the face of authoritarian consolidation, um, building cultures of peace in the face of increasingly violent systems and cultures, and what the ecological also has to do with this inquiry.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I am beginning again, it feels like, when it comes to this project, because it's very new. And I think using my own language, finding that I'm kind of referring back to several people that I've learned from places. So to describe it quickly, I think one of the things I'm trying to do is some research and reading around our relationship to the more than human world or to nature. It's a different language for it. I like the language of more than human, as I've learned it, it means, that we're not separate from nature, we're a part of it. And so it's the thing that's much bigger than us, the natural world. Um, and in particular, I'm asking the question, I was a hospice chaplain for a long time. And I say a long time, I was a hospice chaplain for 5 years. And then chaplaincy has kind of been part of my roles ever since then. This is maybe like 15 years ago. Um, Yeah, the question that I'm asking is like, how has nature or the more than human world been almost a chaplain to me, having noticed the way that it's happened, really particularly over the past 5 years, going through a number of different questions and experiences in my life. Nature has shown up for me in kind of incredible ways, ways that are really hard to explain. Mostly have to do it through story, and even then, I feel like it sounds a little woo-woo whenever I say it, but it feels like nature really showed up for me in times of transition and difficulty. And as I started to sort of pay attention to the grief and pain of this moment around me, I met different teachers who have told me or have taught me a variety of different things. But one of the teachers that I met asked me to take seriously um, that nature was sort of speaking in some ways, that we were in communication with nature, and that the pain that I feel in rooms, particularly of human beings around, war, and you were talking about these things that are happening in our world politically, but also ecologically. There's really terrifying, scary things that are happening, and there are painful things, and it's been happening for a long time. So that is not to say that all of this is completely new, but the pain that we feel, she said, it's human, and it also is tied to the grief and pain that the more than human world is feeling. And if nature had been there for me in times of transition and difficulty and fear, I'm asking the question, what is mine to do then in response to the pain, grief, fear of the more than human, of uh,
Mm,
yeah, beyond human beings. Um, and which doesn't say that it isn't also about human beings, because once again, our connection to it, where it's inextricable. Sometimes was taught by teachers also to even see my body as being made up of multiple organisms. So what is even myself, what a human being, if it's not also, um, yeah, an interplay of multiple organisms at work in order to keep me alive. I depend on food, I depend on plants and animals, and yeah, so this question, what does chaplaincy mean to the more than human world, is what I'm researching. I'm going into like some interviews with it to talk to people who have been thinking deeply, but also talking to people that I would say are practicing chaplaincy to the more than human world, seeing how they do it, even though they might not use the word chaplaincy, but it's sort of like identifying what some of these patterns might look like um, if we take a chaplaincy frame. Uh, Yeah, and then creating some sort of content from it.
mm,
So the journalist, creative writer part of myself is alive and well
mhm,
with this project.
mm,
Yeah, I feel like I'm just giving like a lot of information on what I'm working on, but it's new because I was creative writer, sort of journalism background, and then got into hospice work, got into oral histories and recording people's stories, and then got into conversation and dialogue projects. And this just feels like a very different subject, a very different piece. And but it also feels very relevant to to this moment.
Yes. Well, I would love to um, open into some of the stories. You mentioned you had some stories that um, helped you sort of feel into what this is all about and just like really get a sense of, I love what you talk about of it's almost like this shared mutuality of like the earth having accompanied and supported and nature supported you through so much grief, transition, etc. I would widen that out to like is supporting all of us as well in this very moment, just the act of being held
Yeah,
physically on
yeah,
on earth and going to trees, turning towards the birds, going into bodies of water. That is such a portal I've heard for so many communities and cultures for grief, for transition and transformation. But it's not just I love this of you mentioned it's not just the receiving of that, but it's also the mutuality of like what is
Right.
yours, what is ours to do as we show up for her as well. Um, I really just want to stay here, and then my
Yeah.
meta brain is also going to, and this has something to do with this what Dr. King speaks about around the evil triplets of militarism, of racism, of excessive consumerism. But
Well,
I want to hold that kind of in the backdrop
yeah.
as we stay with any stories that feel like they want to emerge right now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a way that I've also been hearing more than human as a sort of, I don't know, like the other side of less than human, a
Mhm.
phrase that I feel like has been used to enforce so much violence on groups of people. And that leads directly to a story where the first time that I'd say the natural world really started, it was almost the what broke open all of these experiences. And and you were there actually at this retreat in Pecos, New Mexico. And I remember there was a conversation I had had with one of the people that was there, and I had said I'm starting to really wrestle with this question about cultural loss within my family. So I'm Chicano, Mexican American, born in South Texas. I don't speak Spanish. My grandparents lost, or not lost, my grandparents didn't teach my parents Spanish. I used to get really angry about that. It was like, why, Grandma and Grandpa, did you not do this? And they taught me about history. My grandfather was actually like a really big story keeper and would tell me what it was like to grow up in that area of South Texas at the time, and the discrimination, the being hit at school, the expulsions, things that, physical and systemic punishments for speaking Spanish, the difficulty finding a job, not being sort of welcomed into business associations because of accents, because of just being Hispanic, color. Um, so I mean, this legacy that he had taught me about, just the loss of Spanish within my family, but then even going further back, I would ask my grandmother, what what about our indigenous ancestry do we know? And she told me once, she said, the unfortunate things, I have no idea. Other than that my grandfather used to speak a language that my grandmother, whenever she would hear him saying it, and it's sort of like Spanish, again, Spanish lineage and indigenous lineage, her grandmother would tell her grandfather, we don't speak that language um, in front of the kids. She's like, so he wasn't really allowed to speak the language in front of me. He didn't teach me where it came from. I don't know what, what culture it belonged to. And so there's loss. It's like, there's not something I can really reclaim. And I remember talking to somebody there at that retreat in New Mexico, and I said, I don't really know how to grieve that or what to do with it. Um, and she invited me to stomp. She said, our folklorico traditions, because she was asking very similar questions. She had different lineages, but Mexican was among them, and she was in Florida, and it's just amazing to be with somebody that was asking very similar questions. And she said, for me, folklorico has stomping in it, and it's a direct tie to our lineage there, and it's something you might try. And we had actually been talking about a Bad Bunny song. I went out into the mountains very early in the morning. I woke up at like 5 in the morning, could not go back to sleep. Walked up there, put on some music, and just stomped and stomped and stomped. It felt so, so good. And that afternoon, we had a sort of, we were having some conversations. Some of them were kind of difficult conversations, again, like the presence of pain. And it just led into this breaking, like grief just pouring out. My grandfather had also passed a few months before, and I think that was part of what was going on. I was thinking about him a lot. We were talking about land and lineage, and I was thinking about the loss of my grandparents' home. Refinery had bought it at, one point in South Texas, and sort of like all of these complications of like, yeah, what to do with all this loss. And I just wept and wept. Our friend was there to sort of meet me and sort of encourage me to just keep weeping, keep letting it go. And I remember she invited me to come back to the group also in that state of weeping. And the group held me in it. And we led into more story sharing among the group and like how we were entering these conversations in a real like heart-centered way. But anyways, to fast forward a few months from then, hawks started to show up in my life. The first one happening as walking a labyrinth during a time of intense anxiety. This hawk flew by me, landed in a tree, and we had a 5 minute, I would say, just like staring at each other. And all of the anxiety I was feeling about this moment, and again, it was another group setting, like lots of pain in a room. And that hawk just, I felt like all the anxiety just come way down. And it was the first of like so many instances of hawks in the subsequent months showing up. Sometimes I have a picture on my phone showing up at my window here in Sunnyside, Queens, New York. It's a beautiful red-tailed hawk. And they were always happening at these moments where I was having like a lot of anxiety. But yeah, that first experience, uh, yeah, with that hawk, really seeing it, really having like a sense of like, oh wow, something special is happening here. And then for it to show up multiple times after that, I was like, I have to pay attention to this. I really have to pay attention to this.
Mm.
And grief has been a big part of, I would say, so sort of like the grief of groups of people that I'm with, communities that I'm with, my own personal grief and anxiety. It's like these hawks have been showing up, yeah, at interesting intersections of those things. So yeah, some story.
The what's present as you share this, Eddie, is I recently read this book by Kazu Haga called Fierce Vulnerability.
Mm,
And he talks about what if we led our movements and protests and work not only with anger and rage at the injustice, but also with our grief. Because
yeah,
really grief is underneath it all. And and then when you're talking about, well, what I hear is how do we possibly contend with, hold, experience grief, like the levels of grief that there are, and how the more than human, these hawks, um, the land, stomping, feeling that connection, letting what sounds also like your own grief, ancestral grief, move through grief of loss of language, culture, all these things. I mean, it feels like you're inviting in um, another being into the room to support and to anchor. And there's almost this like mythopoetic quality and like the symbolism of the hawk. And of course, I'm thinking about indigenous communities and all the wisdom and knowing that they have lived through in relationship to the more than human. And yeah, that's what is present with me when I hear that. It's like this invitation into a deeper sense of relationality that is like always there for us, and how do we attune ourselves to pay attention to that, and the ways that that can anchor resource and invite us deeper into our grief, but also that we are here on earth as we are also moving towards human dignity, human liberation against human suffering. There's the
right.
more than human that's here with us too.
Yeah, two things are coming up when you're saying that, and it's like I am also thinking of like some of the indigenous elders I've had the sort of privilege to learn from in the last decade. One elder said, you know, we think sometimes that our human intelligence is going to get us out of this, and we are such a small portion of the intelligence of the larger whole. And this larger intelligence, it's like how are we, we'll need the intelligence of the earth to move through whatever it is that is ahead. And so I'm just thinking of that, that is definitely coming up. And then also the idea of lineage, which you mentioned. I'm thinking of one of the Kathy Sanchez from the National Council of Elders, who told me one time years ago that the healing that we do in our own lifetime um, has implications for the healing of our ancestors. That we can help with the healing of our ancestors and the healing work that we do now, which at the time I didn't fully understand what she meant. And I still don't know that I fully understand what it means, other than I have a better sense that I am healing things that have also been sort of handed pain that is also being handed down through generations. And one of the a retreat, another retreat that you had actually invited me into at Commonweal. I'll never forget talking to Poiling, one of the people you had invited, and she asked me, "Do you think maybe the hawks are showing up to remind you of an original place of belonging even before human culture?"
Mm,
And it was such a powerful that question was such a powerful healing moment for me in my journey of this holding this question, in part because it was like, oh yeah, our ancestors are also um, other species. Like
mhm,
our ancestors include oceanic beings millions of years ago that were beginning to evolve into the forms that we, yeah, eventually our own human form. So it's these scales of time are huge,
mm,
and yeah, I feel like the grief that you are mentioning is so true. It's like the grief is part of it, and also what's underneath the grief has so much to say about what we love, what our values are, what we care for, and what it looks like to be motivated by what we love and care for, not just what we're against, feels like such a powerful thing that we
mm,
tap into
mm.
if we allow ourselves to access that grief and the accompaniment of the earth along with it.
Yeah, and if I may just continue this thread, in Kazu's book, he also talks about how, is my internet okay, by the way?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he talks about how in our movements, what you were just saying, we often and understandably like are directing our energy towards an opponent, whether it's a piece of legislation that we want passed or not passed, or it's a corporation that we're resisting, or a politician. And he said, what if we actually redirected the energy to not just what we're against, but also what we're for? And really, what we're for is from that place of love, and how in Indigenous communities, they often, when they show up in protest, he was referring specifically to Standing Rock and the Dakota Pipeline, and how the elders there made it clear that when people showed up in protest, it was actually ceremony. Like they were engaging in ceremony, which is connected to ritual, which is connected to a deeper sense of space-time, which is connected to the sacred, and that they were showing up not as protesters, but as water protectors.
Yeah.
And just that kind of, um, I guess, invitation of the sacred is was so powerful to and moving, and it is so different from some of the actions and protests and spaces that I've been in, where, and Kazu also, wow, Kazu should be here. Kazu also writes about how, we're organizing in material reality to affect material change and conditions, right? And what Dr. King talks about too, like there are material oppressions. And then Kazu talks about how there's also this ultimate realm at the same time that transcends time space, in which that is the realm of this of spirit, of however people understand that, and that we need to be working in both realms, because to work only in the spirit realm is to bypass the
Right.
material conditions that need to be changed, and to only move in the material world. Um, it limits what's possible in the heart and in the spirit. And for some reason, I really hear that alive in your inquiry as well. And just, yeah, curious how you would respond to that.
Yeah. I mean, it's a, yeah, I feel like thank you, Kazu, for just beautiful reminders. And thank you, Dr. King, for beautiful reminders. And that the spirit, yeah, the spiritual work, it feels like it's such a big part of what I've been interested in for quite a while. And my interest into the spiritual like world was also through story. I mean, I mentioned that, oral histories had been a big part of it. Conversation and dialogue projects. It's sort of deep listening requires entering in the space of story, but that story is also something that's malleable. It's worked with. So in hospice, for instance, the spiritual care, as I learned it, could take the form of sitting and hearing people share stories of their life. But oftentimes at end of life, those stories were in flux. They were being edited in real time. People were saying the same story multiple times, in part because they were trying to figure out what all of it meant within the context of their life. And one way of telling the story is, might be something that we want to honor. And then another way of telling the story might be something that people want to work with because they're like, I think that's been a really limited way of seeing what that experience has been like. And it needs to, I, I might need to tell it a different way if it's to be more honest or if I'm to, sort of free myself from an old way of looking at things that is no longer needed anymore. Um, and it's interesting how sometimes being in those story spaces, you would see somebody working through telling a story, making meaning of things, and who they were at the beginning of that time together and who they were at the afterwards could be really different. And that sometimes what it meant was that they had gone through some kind of transformation, that afterwards they were ready to do something different. They were ready to live in a different way. They had made a decision that in the next few days they were going to try to do something important. In terms of legacy work, there was also times where you're looking, how much time do I have left? What do I want to do in that time that I have left? Um, yeah, so it does feel to me, if I'm thinking about it from a hospice point of view too, right? Like you need time to sit with the stories. You need time to listen deeply. You need time to honor. You need time to wrestle. Um, and then there's a time to put down the storytelling and to go do, to act, to make some choices, to go out into the world and materially change things. So yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I, I think when I'm thinking about it from a spiritual point of view too, I mentioned the sort of cultural loss of my indigenous ancestry, and there have been times that I've asked the question, what then do I do in the absence of um, like ceremonies that would have been handed down by my family? Um, and it has been interesting in terms of the creative life to be invited into like a reimagination. Then it's like if I don't have a song that was handed to me by my family or by my ancestry, uh, it's not about like trying to reclaim something that I can't reclaim or to sort of try to take from some other culture something like um, what are the creative capacities that I might have to sing a new song? What are the creative capacities within a group of people that's joining for the first time from multiple traditions to say what ceremony will we create? Um, that has been a little bit more the area where I feel like um, I've been in, but yeah, so I appreciate you bringing in sort of like the idea of ancestry, of ceremony, of how it fits within like our sense of the spiritual alongside material change. Yeah, it's a really rich subject.
Yeah. It reminds me of our time in New York where there were amazing elders and youngers, and Michelle Alexander and Niall Fort were sharing about a project or an initiative that they're working on called the Spirit of Justice, of creating spaces for activists and organizers to also have outside of, but not in opposition to, but outside of religious context to bring in the spirit of justice of their ancestors, of the heart and spirit work and nourishment that is needed to sustain us. Um, and
Yeah.
one thing you mentioned about this work taking time, I'm really curious to hear um, how you grapple with that. These times are so urgent, and we are being uh, bombarded with um, wars in Iran and Lebanon and Gaza and Palestine across the world. There's so much violence here, and I've often wondered about like what does healing mean in the context of it taking a lot of time when violence happens so quickly? Like how do we contend with that? And I don't think that yeah, there's often such a binary that gets created around healing work and then work of activism and action and actually they're one of the same
Yeah.
or that feels like a thing that our movement culture today I think is really trying to expand and to include.
Yeah.
And you bring in the more than human, and that's on a completely different time scale as well. Though, of course, with the climate crisis, it is so urgent as well. So, just how do you make sense of all of this, Eddie?
Uh, who was it that said, like there it's like things are like so important and so yeah, things have to happen so swiftly, so it's really important to slow down.
These times are urgent. We must slow down.
Yeah, that's right.
Bio Okumuafe
Is that
said that.
bio? Of
Hmm.
course it's bio. Um, yeah, I've really been drawn to the like ecosystem model of movement work and in some ways really comforted by it because I think for a while I was giving in to a sense of guilt that I wasn't doing more, in part because I saw the need for, say, direct action in a variety of different ways. And I was like, why am I here and not there? Why am I doing this and not that? And the idea that there are multiple roles to play within the work that is ahead and the work of this moment amidst the urgency, A is good to know because it helps me know then that there's no one way to do it and that there's multiple ways that I can enter into this work and moving towards the futures that we're trying to make real. But I think there's the important part about that then becomes the discernment of what is mine to do. And that to me is sort of tied to that sort of storytelling, the reflection, the sort of spiritual work of thinking through like who am I? What is my life about? What in the words of like Howard Thurman, like what brings me to life? Because what the world needs is more people who have come alive. I wonder, yeah, I had a friend, and you talked about being bombarded. I had a friend the other day who was talking to me about walled gardens in Europe. He lives in Scotland, I believe. And he said, it's incredible. You'll be in these really windy places and you walk through a door and all of a sudden you're in this beautiful garden and you can hear the other person speak. You can hear yourself think. The plant life is blooming in a way that it wouldn't be able to outside because the winds are too strong. And was really wondering, especially in the midst of all of the news and the chaos and, the social media apps were just like the infinite loop of just doom scrolling and so what conscious in my own consciousness, what's the equivalent of the walled garden? When am I giving myself that time? And in terms of the urgency, it feels urgent that we do the work of discerning what is ours to do and making time to reevaluate, like, is this mine to do? Is this, where am I supposed to be? And there are going to be so many voices of people around you telling you, oh, I think you should do this. I think you should do that. And at the end of the day, like, that sense of I don't know, that spiritual connection with whatever it is that's greater than yourself and what you're accountable to in terms of like your conscience and how you live your life and what is yours to do in the world. It feels like to be there and to act from that place feels so, so important. Um, but I don't know that I have full answers for this because just like we need multiple people playing different roles, we need first responders, we need disruptors, we need healers, we need people that are out at protest. I mean, there's so many different ways that we need to be acting. Yeah, I don't know how it all fits together, and so I feel like my view will always be limited.
Well, that's where the role of, I guess, mystery and not knowing play
Yeah,
just as much a role as what we do know and what we can see.
yeah.
Um, Eddie, I want to come back to the chaplaincy piece of it and um, hear about. I know this is not exactly work you're right now engaged with, but I know we've talked about, movement chaplaincy and just the role of accompaniment, of witness. And right now, your inquiry is around like accompaniment with the more than human. Um, so I guess I have a two-part question, but I'll start with the first, which is, yeah, what do you see as the role of accompaniment within our movement work, given, your very real and tangible experiences, like accompanying people end of life? Like, how do you see those kinds of skills and qualities to be of service to movements?
I think in a lot of ways it's what it's about, the sense that we're connected to one another, that when we're moving, we're doing so in a sense that we're not isolated or separate from, but that we're part of a greater whole. And so one of the things I feel like became really clear in chaplaincy work was there was no clear delineation between who was giving care and who was receiving it.
Mm.
There were so many times that I'd go visit somebody and I was in the role of the chaplain and they were in the role of the patient, and then in the midst of building a relationship it became really clear that they were also giving me a gift by sharing their stories, by sharing their wisdom, and I was receiving as well. And so and also that some of the most profound healing that could take place, it wasn't that I was a healer in some ways. The best that I could do was offer my presence, my humanity, a sense of just like my being there with somebody, and that the healing actually came from being in relationship, from feeling that there was a genuine connection that had been formed, and that whatever somebody was going through, they weren't going through it alone. There was somebody else that was there. I mean, there's always an aspect of something that you're going through on your own because it is your life, and particularly in death, there's a departure that is your own, and also. To walk alongside someone on the road for as long as you can and to be with them is yeah, the relationship is so much a part of it. And so the deep listening, the connectedness, it feels like it's not just a tactic, it is a part of what we are wanting to build in terms of culture.
Hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And the other wondering I have is about with the more than human, how especially the question around what are we how are we accompanying nature? Like it's such a two-way exchange.
Yeah.
What does that look like and mean for you?
I think that is something that I am still wanting to learn, and something that I'm just discovering. I think it's more than anything, what's becoming apparently clear is that our culture has been so tied to extraction and consumption, and that to ask the question, what can I do to give back to the world for all that it has given me, what can I do to tend to the pain and the grief of the world that is so tied to the sort of extraction and consumption cultures that we've created that I am a part of. Like that is that's going to be something I learn
Mm.
over time. This is like a it's going to be a huge mindset shift to me and a big part of it, I think, beginning again. Um, yeah, I'm seeing a message here from Peter. I but I think in part, one of the big parts, at least initially, is remembering this world is there. And there is a tension, and I am seeing, I'm going to tie that, Peter, to what you're saying here about attention. Just switching my attention to the point that I'm not thinking just about my human needs, just about myself and human beings, but I am tending and listening to what is going on in the natural world. That is at least one step towards the sort of reciprocity that I can offer. To witness what's happening and where I see a potential to make a different move that moves more towards wholeness, towards healing, towards wellness, like that I can do that. But it takes my listening first.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. I'd love if you could, on this piece of like in within the culture of violence, there's a subset perhaps within that around just our cultures of distraction and
Yeah.
that being just pervasive everywhere. That also shows up in our movements and is beyond. Um, and this quality of attention that you are inviting us into that we can also begin to practice like with nature. Like there's something so beautiful about being able to fully take in a tree that is in my own practice of there's like a eucalyptus tree that is not far from where I live, and I've been visiting it over the last couple of years now and just being able to pay attention and see and also practice listening from this deeper place of what does this being have to share with me, and it being a place where I turn to for so much of when grief comes up for me or when
Yeah.
confusion or longing. And I don't know, I just think it somehow relates to there's a deeper quality of attention and relationship that happens when I'm in relationship with this tree that is, a tiny thing, but um, grounds me in a way that um, the Zoom land and the social media land and the news world can never do. And so I wonder how that is part of or might be part of your inquiry.
Yeah. I mean, there's a number of different ways that my mind went when you were talking about all that. One of the last ones that I was thinking about was just like the distraction also of like um, the news cycle, so many voices telling me what the story of this moment is. Um, Meanwhile, I live in a particular place with particular people, and there's the story too of what is happening in my immediate surroundings and what kind of an influence I can have on what is happening within that space based on my presence and on my actions. Um, and it can be sometimes distracting to hear of all of the things all of the time that are happening that makes it harder for me to do what I can do within my more immediate surroundings because I'm overwhelmed with how big some of these things are. Um, but I think I'm also drawn to the sort of like, I mentioned consumption and so much of distraction these days is also consuming things. Um, One of the hard parts about this, and in chaplaincy, you would go someplace, typically when you were playing the role of a chaplain, you would go to visit people and then you would come home and there would be a rest. You weren't sort of steeped in these areas of pain and grief all the time. When it comes to the pain of the natural world, this is literally where we live. It's happening here right now. I mean, it's just there's no real getting away from it. and also, that I eat, that I am using energy. We are here on Zoom, like the just the impacts of everything that we do have, implications. And yet the need for connection, and
Mhm.
yet the need for sustenance. And so to hold that, like, what is actually a distraction, and I'm doing it because I'm like not wanting to pay attention to the grief, not wanting to pay attention to the pain. I'm wanting to numb out, disconnect. Like, when am I sort of going towards something for that reason? And then when am I going towards things because I need connection, because I need sustenance, because I need to fill up so that I
Mhm.
can have what I need in order to go out and give. I feel like there's a line of difference there that I have to continue to investigate, and that feels to me like an ongoing practice.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Eddie, this has been such a rich conversation today. And as we close, I guess I just want to ask you what kind of invitation you would like to make to those who are listening to this conversation today, who are engaged in movement work, are interested in this question of beginning again, um, in these times, in this culture of violence, wanting to participate in building cultures of peace, um, with this work around the more than human. What would you like to, yeah, invite us into as a question, as a practice, as a, yeah, anything.
I think I think I would invite the practice of a sit spot, um, which is still aspirational for me, and I'm still doing it on and off, but I keep intending it. And the general idea of a sit spot, as I've come to understand it and learn it, has been you find a spot in your area, typically outside, or it can also be at a window if it's you can't get outside, or you do your best to find a place where you can be connected to nature or the northern human world. And you sit for typically about 30 minutes. You put your phone away and you use your senses. One thing that I've heard in terms of the eyes is to use your peripheral vision rather than sort of like focusing in on one thing or another. And if you catch yourself focusing in on one thing, noting it and coming back to the peripheral vision and just sit for 30 minutes, take in what's happening. What are the creatures around you? And a part of it is also just like you are lessening your zone of disturbance. So when you sit quietly, and the animals that might have scurried because your human presence sort of scared them away, as you get quiet, that disturbance lessens and they're more likely to come out and resume life as normal. So you get to see what are the creatures around, what are the plants around, and to do that over a period of time, if you show up every single day. That you get to know the place, you get to know those creatures, you get to see how they change, what happens with seasons. If you're already attuned to the seasons, you can see what's happening in particular this year. Seasons are changing, right, with some of the ecological changes that are taking place. So, um, yeah, the daily presence to your place feels to me like an excellent place to begin,
Mm,
wherever it is
I
that
love
you are.
that.
And if
The
you're
sit
moving
spot.
around, yeah, find a place and at least just get to know the place for however long you're there.
Mm. And is there any place that we can follow along this work or journey that you're on?
TBD. I think the place, where I am currently doing this work is with a fellowship right now at NYU's Moth program. It's called More Than Human Life. And so it's based at NYU Law School. So I would say follow what they're up to. It feels like they're up to really,
Mm.
really cool things. And I have a recommendation of reading also Emergence magazine, which is an um, incredible source of knowledge. It's not where to follow me yet, but
Wonderful.
yeah.
Good to be with you, Eddie. Thank you
You
so
too,
much.
Serena. Yeah.